My name is Iris. I'm 29 and I'm a licensed nurse practitioner. 3 days after my grandmother's funeral, I discovered that the house she left me, the one she promised me every single holiday for the last 6 years, had already been sold. My uncle had forged my signature on the deed transfer while I was sitting in the front pew crying. When I confronted him at the repast, he looked me in the eye and said, "She would have wanted the family to benefit." He said it the way you'd explain a parking spot to a stranger. Calm, certain, like I was the one who didn't understand something obvious. Before I tell you how this ended, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had someone use your grief against you, hit subscribe, because this story is for you. My grandmother, everyone called her Mimi, raised me from age 7 after my mom's addiction got bad enough that the state got involved. She was a retired school teacher in Knoxville, Tennessee. Small house, big yard, African violets on every windowsill. She smelled like Pond's cold cream and the good kind of fabric softener. She was the most orderly person I've ever known. She wrote everything down. Everything. Grocery lists, phone numbers, the date she planted each bulb in the garden, the exact amount she paid for her car insurance every 6 months going back to 1987. So when she sat me down at her kitchen table in the spring of my second year of nursing school and slid a manila envelope across to me, I knew it was real. Inside was her handwritten will, witnessed and notarized, leaving her house, the only asset that mattered, to me. She paid it off in 1999. No mortgage. Just a house worth somewhere around $280,000, sitting quietly in East Knoxville, gathering value while she gathered African violets. "You're the one who stayed," she said. She wasn't being cruel to the others. She was just stating a fact. My uncle had moved to Phoenix 15 years ago, chasing some business venture that never quite materialized. My mom was in and out of recovery. My aunt on my dad's side had her own family, her own life. But I was the one who drove Mimi to her cardiology appointments. I was the one who refilled her prescriptions, who figured out her Medicare Part D, who sat with her through 2 biopsy scares and 1 actual surgery. I was the one who called every Sunday at 7 p.m. without fail. She knew that. She put it in writing. And I put the envelope in my filing cabinet under W for Will, the way she would have done. My uncle showed up to the funeral in a rented Escalade. That was the first thing I noticed. He lives 3 states away and takes the bus when he visits family, so a rented Escalade at a February funeral in Knoxville was already a sentence that needed a period. His wife was with him, my aunt by marriage, a woman I'd met maybe 7 times, and they both hugged me too long and too hard, the way people do when they're performing grief for an audience. He cried at the service. I'll give him that. Or he did something that looked enough like crying that it would hold up in any family court of opinion. Mimi died on a Tuesday. The funeral was Saturday. The repast was at my cousin's house. She's my uncle's daughter, which I will come back to. And by Sunday, I was back at my apartment in Nashville, where I was finishing my nurse practitioner residency, exhausted in the specific way that grief exhausts you, the way that isn't about sleep at all. I didn't check my email for 3 days. There was no reason to. I had bereavement leave approved. My shifts were covered, and every message I got was a condolence card with a digital envelope. I wasn't ready for any of it. I let it pile up. On the 4th day, I opened my laptop and found, buried between a CBS receipt and a newsletter I've never unsubscribed from, an automated email from Knox County Register of Deeds. It was a confirmation notice. A deed transfer had been processed. The property address was Mimi's house. The date was the day after the funeral. I read it 4 times. Then I looked up the Knox County Register of Deeds website and typed in the address myself. The record loaded. The property had been transferred from my grandmother's estate to a buyer I did not recognize, an LLC with a generic name that meant nothing to me. The seller of record was listed as the estate of my grandmother, represented by the executor. I did not know there was an executor. The will she had shown me did not name one. I had assumed, because she had told me, because I had the envelope, because it was in her handwriting, that there was a process, a probate, a lawyer, something that would involve me. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time without moving. My coffee went cold. I kept refreshing the page like the record might change. Then I called my uncle. He answered on the second ring, which told me he was expecting the call. I kept my voice level. I asked him if he knew that Mimi's house had been sold. He said yes. I asked him when that had happened. He said he'd been handling it since before the funeral, that there was a buyer lined up, that the estate needed to be liquidated quickly because of outstanding debts. I asked him what outstanding debts. Mimi had no mortgage, no credit card balance I had ever seen evidence of, and had paid cash for her last car in 2018. There was a pause. Medical bills, he said. End of life care is expensive, Iris. I had helped manage her end of life care. I had been the one on the phone with the hospice coordinator. I had seen the insurance summaries. Her Medicare coverage had been nearly comprehensive. The out of pocket balance was under $4,000. He was lying, and he was doing it with the confidence of someone who assumed I wouldn't check. She left me the house, I said. I have the will. That will isn't valid, he said. And his voice changed when he said it. Got flatter, more careful. It wasn't filed with the court. I had the estate attorney review everything, and the legal document is the one that was filed during probate, the one naming me as executor. I asked him what document named him as executor. He said the updated will. I asked him when Mimi had updated her will. He said 6 months before she died. I asked him if he had a copy. He said his attorney had one. I ended the call. My hands were not shaking. That surprised me. I think I was past the shaking stage and into something colder and more focused. The same place I go when a patient codes, and there's no time to feel anything because the feeling will have to wait until after. I called my mother. That sounds like a strange choice, but my mother, 3 years clean, genuinely trying, is the one person in my family who has never had a reason to lie to me about my uncle. Their relationship has always been exactly what it appears to be, two siblings who don't particularly like each other. Did you know Grandma updated her will? I asked her. There was a silence. No, she said. When? Uncle says 6 months before she died. He says there's a version that names him as executor and leaves the house to the estate to be liquidated. A longer silence. Then, Iris. He was down here in August. I saw him at the Walgreens on Kingston Pike, and he asked me if I knew who Mama's attorney was. I thought he was just asking because she'd been sick. I told him. August. 6 months before February. The timeline fit perfectly. My mother's voice was careful when she said the next part. She wouldn't have changed it voluntarily. You know that. She talked about that house going to you every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every Easter. She told anybody who would listen. I knew that. I'd heard her say it myself. The problem was knowing it and proving it were two very different things. Here is the thing about being a nurse practitioner that people don't always understand. We document everything, not because we're paranoid, but because documentation is the difference between a patient being safe and a patient being harmed. I had spent 5 years developing the instinct to record, to date, to witness, to file. And because Mimi raised me, and Mimi was the most orderly person I had ever known, I had kept everything. I went to my filing cabinet. I pulled the manila envelope. The will was there, signed, dated March of 2019, witnessed by two of her neighbors whose names I still had, notarized with a stamp that was still legible. I photographed every page with my phone. Then I opened my email and searched for every message Mimi had ever sent me from her AOL account. She used AOL until the end, refused to change, and I found 14 separate messages over 4 years in which she mentioned, in various contexts, that the house was mine. One of them, from 2 Christmases ago, said verbatim, I want you to know the house is yours and the paperwork is done and nobody can change that. She was wrong about the last part. But she had written it down, the way she wrote everything down, and now I had it. I called a probate attorney in Knoxville the next morning. I found her through a referral from a colleague whose family had gone through something similar. Her name is not something I need to share here, but she was the kind of person who listens to you for 3 minutes and then starts writing things down, which is the exact quality I needed in that moment. I sent her the photographs of the original will. I sent her the email chain. I told her everything. August, the Walgreens, my uncle's call, the timing of the deed transfer. She called me back that afternoon. The deed transfer has already gone through, she said. That's the bad news, and it's significant. Reversing a completed property transfer is a long road. She paused. But here's what's interesting. The will he filed. I pulled it from the probate record. It was executed in August, as he said. But the notary stamp on it is from a notary in Maricopa County, Arizona. That's where he lives. I understood immediately. She never went to Arizona. She was in hospice-eligible care starting in July. The attorney confirmed. She would not have traveled to Arizona to sign a new will. If this document was signed in Arizona, either the notary came to Tennessee, which would be unusual, and there'd be a record, or the signature isn't hers. The signature isn't hers. I sat with those four words for a long time. This wasn't opportunism. This wasn't my uncle finding a loophole or talking a sick woman into a bad decision. He had forged her name on a legal document. He had used her death, her funeral, her grief-paralyzed family, the window of time when everyone was looking at flowers and casseroles and not at county records, to steal a house that was not his. The next 72 hours with a kind of logistics that feel unreal while you're inside them. My attorney filed an emergency motion to contest the will on the grounds of suspected forgery. We hired a forensic document examiner, an expert in signature analysis, who compared the signature on the August will to 6 years of documents bearing my grandmother's actual signature, the 2019 will, her Medicare paperwork, her car insurance renewals, the deed to the house from when she originally purchased it. His preliminary assessment came back in 48 hours. The signatures were not consistent. The pressure patterns, the letter formation, the baseline drift. The word he used in his report was incongruent. Meanwhile, my attorney tracked down the Arizona notary. She had never been to Tennessee. She had no record of a home visit. She had no record of my grandmother at all. What she did have was a memory, vague but real, of my uncle coming into her office with a woman she had assumed was his wife, and a document she had stamped without examining closely, because that's what notaries do when nothing seems obviously wrong. My uncle had brought someone with him, a woman who was not my grandmother, and a notary who had not verified identity the way she should have. I did not call my uncle when all of this came together. I did not send a text. I did not give him any warning that we were coming. My attorney had advised against it, and I agreed with her completely. You do not warn people who have proven they will use the warning. On a Thursday morning in March, 5 weeks after the funeral, my attorney and I drove to Knoxville. My cousin, my uncle's daughter, the one who had hosted the repast, called me twice that morning. I did not answer. I would deal with that later. My uncle was at Mimi's house, his house, as he believed at this point, meeting with a contractor about some renovations he was planning before listing it officially on the market. We pulled up to the curb at 10:15 a.m. The African violets in the front window were still there. Nobody had touched them. He came to the door and his face did the thing. Faces do when the brain understands something before the mouth is ready to respond to it. He saw me. He saw the woman beside me. He saw the folder under her arm. "Iris," he said. His voice was careful now. All the confidence from the phone call was somewhere else. "This isn't a good time. We won't be long," my attorney said, and she introduced herself. We went inside. He sat down at Mimi's kitchen table, the same table where she had slid that manila envelope across to me 6 years ago, and my attorney laid out the situation in plain terms. The forensic analysis, the notary statement, the timeline that placed my grandmother in hospice-adjacent care while her supposed signature appeared on a document notarized in Arizona. The emergency motion that had been filed. He didn't say much. His face went through several things. Disbelief, then calculation, then a kind of settling. The look of someone who has been running a bluff and finally understands the cards have been seen. "I was trying to protect the family," he said. Eventually, after a long silence in which the contractor, who was still in the back of the house and had clearly heard everything, found an urgent reason to leave. "From what?" I asked. I genuinely wanted to know. He looked at the table. "She had debts," he said, but his voice had lost the certainty from before. He said it like a sentence he'd prepared that no longer fit the room. "She didn't," I said. He said nothing. My attorney explained the next steps. The matter had been referred to the Knox County District Attorney's Office. Will forgery in Tennessee is a Class D felony. Fraud upon the court is a separate matter. The deed transfer would be contested, and given the evidence, the likelihood of reversal was significant. She used the word significant the way people in her field use it, which means she was fairly sure. He did not yell. He did not call me ungrateful. He did not make the speech I had expected about family loyalty and what Mimi would have wanted. He just sat there in his mother's kitchen in front of the African violets and looked like a man who had done a precise calculation and arrived at the wrong answer. My cousin did not take it quietly. She called me 17 times over the following 2 days, and when I finally answered, because eventually you have to answer, she told me I was tearing the family apart. that I was making her father into a criminal over a house, that Mimi would be heartbroken. I asked her if she knew her father had forged Mimi's signature. There was a silence. Then she said, it wasn't that simple. I told her that in law and in medicine, forgery is actually very simple. It's one of the cleaner categories. She hung up. The legal process took 4 months from that morning in March. My uncle, facing 2 separate criminal referrals and a civil suit, retained an attorney of his own who negotiated. He did not go to trial. He agreed to cooperate with the reversal of the deed transfer to reimburse the estate for all costs associated with the fraud investigation, and to formal criminal charges that included a guilty plea to a reduced count, with 3 years of probation and a permanent bar from serving as executor of any estate in Tennessee or Arizona. The house came back to me on a Wednesday in late July. My attorney called me when the transfer was finalized, and I sat in my car in the parking lot of the hospital where I work, and I cried for the first time since any of this had started. Not because of the house exactly, because of the African violets still alive, because my grandmother had left care instructions taped to the inside of the cabinet under the kitchen sink, written in her handwriting, and I had found them when I went back for the first walkthrough. She documented everything. She raised me to document everything. That habit, her habit, passed down across a kitchen table, is the reason I still have her house. My uncle and I do not speak. My cousin, after some time and some processing of her own, sent me a message that was not an apology exactly, but was the kind of message that leaves a door open rather than closing it. I haven't decided yet what to do with that door. I'm not in a hurry. My mother came up from Knoxville on a weekend in August, and we sat on the back porch of Mimi's house, my house, and drank iced tea and didn't say much. She looked out at the garden and said she would be so mad at him. And then after a moment, she would be so proud of you. I didn't cry this time. I just nodded and looked at the garden, which needed work, and thought about what she had planted and what I wanted to keep. I'm still in Nashville during the week. The house is being rented to a young school teacher, which felt right, until I finish my residency and figure out the longer plan. The rent covers the property taxes and a little more. The African violets are in my apartment now. I bring them back every few months to water the garden properly and check on things and sit on that porch for a little while. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, and the honest answer is that I move through anger fast, the way I move through a lot of things, because I learned early that staying in a feeling too long is a form of giving someone power they don't deserve to have. What I am is clear, clearer than I've ever been, actually, about who in my life deserves my time and my trust and my Sunday phone calls. Grief is a long road, and people who love you walk it beside you. People who use it to pick your pocket are something else entirely. I know the difference now in a way I can't unknow. If you've ever had to protect something that someone tried to take from you during the worst moment of your life, leave it in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if this video meant something to you, please share it, because somewhere out there, someone is sitting at a kitchen table right now, staring at a county record that doesn't make sense, and they need to know that they are not crazy and they are not alone, and there is a next step. There is always a next step. Subscribe if you're new and take care of yourselves. You have every right to protect what is yours. I think about something Mimi used to say when I was small and something had gone wrong. A broken dish, a missed bus, a test I hadn't prepared for. She'd look at me across that kitchen table and say, "What did you do, and what are you going to do next?" Not as a punishment, as a framework. She wasn't interested in spiraling. She was interested in the next right step. I didn't understand how radical that was until I was sitting in my own kitchen at 29, staring at a county property record that told me my grief had been used against me. What my uncle did had a logic to it, and that logic is worth naming clearly. He watched a sick woman's life narrow down to weeks, and he calculated. He figured that the people closest to her would be too devastated to look at paperwork. He figured that grief is a fog, and fog is useful if you're trying to move something without being seen. He was right about the fog. He was wrong about me. The thing about growing up with someone who documents everything is that it becomes a reflex. You don't think about it. You just do it. You keep the envelope. You save the emails. You date the conversations. Not because you're suspicious, but because you were raised by a woman who understood that memory is imperfect and paper is not. That habit, her habit, is what undid him. Not my anger, not my grief, not my righteous sense of injury. A manila envelope in a filing cabinet under W. I've thought a lot about what it means that he did this. Not just the legal facts of it, but the interior logic. To forge a signature, you have to look at someone's handwriting and deliberately copy it badly enough to pass, but not carefully enough to be real. You have to hold a pen and consciously decide to be someone you're not on paper. That takes a particular kind of detachment from consequence. It takes the belief that you will not be caught, and underneath that, the belief that even if you are, the people you've wronged will absorb it quietly because that's what they've always done. He miscalculated that last part. There's something I want to say about intelligence here. Because people sometimes frame stories like mine as luck, right attorney, right timing, right documents, and the right drawer. And luck was a part of it. I won't pretend otherwise. But the documents existed because I paid attention. The attorney found the notary inconsistency because I gave her complete information. The forensic examiner had 6 years of comparison material because Mimi had signed her name to things her whole life in the same deliberate, looping hand, and I had kept them. Preparation and luck are not the same thing. Preparation is what you do in the quiet years before you need it. What I want you to take from this is not that family is dangerous, though sometimes it is. What I want you to take is something simpler. The habits you build in ordinary time are the tools you have in extraordinary circumstances. Mimi taught me to file things. She taught me to write dates. She taught me that your word is worth more when you can back it up. Those lessons cost her nothing to give, and they cost me nothing to keep. And they were worth, in the end, exactly $280,000 and a house with African violets in the window. Be meticulous with the small things. You don't always know which small thing will matter.